I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm so thrilled to be talking about the wonderful show, Grosse Pointe Garden Society, and I'm joined today by showrunners Krebs and Jenna. And one of the first things that I wanted to ask you both about is, I've heard you both describe the way that setting this show in a suburban community is kind of such a natural, beautiful space for conflict between characters. And so I wanted to ask about the way that having this bubble that all these characters exist in together really set the landscape for a lot of the conflict and tension that you build throughout the series.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of that comes from the specific suburban town that it's set in, Grosse Pointe, and Bill can talk more about that because he's from there. But it's a really sort of cool mix of people who have a lot of money and people who don't have a lot of money. So that sort of already sets the stage for a lot of class conflict, which we
really wanted to have a class warfare sort of story where it's, because the town's so small, you have people, the have-nots, and you have the haves. And so we knew that if we were going to put them together in this garden club, that there would be, inherent tension there.
Did you have a sense as you were developing each of the main characters early on of kind of where in the socioeconomic landscape they were each going to sit?
I mean, that was sort of part of the development, as we...
Even the pitch.
Yeah, this person's going to be very wealthy. Like the Melissa Fumero character, Birdie, we always knew was going to be like a real housewife of Grosse Pointe, so to speak, and sort of this socialite. And
kind of didn't know the value of anything, but knew the price of everything.
Right.
And she was going to learn that over her journey.
Right, right. And then on the opposite spectrum, there's Alice, played by Anna Sophia Robb, who is a public school teacher who should be paid way more than she is getting paid, as teachers, all sort of do. And we always knew that was going to be a struggle for her. And inherently, she was going to see Melissa Fumero's character and sort of dislike her instantly. And
Catherine was going to be the hard worker who kind of earned every single penny, and the perfectionist who really earned her status in Grosse Pointe. And so we kind of had little levels to everyone.
Yeah.
And Brett, again, also working class, really wants to achieve his dream, but is sort of trapped in his, in his former life and hasn't really stepped out of it yet.
I think what's interesting too is that, we've written a lot of pilots and, created shows, and you always do sort of look at what socioeconomic bracket the character falls into. But on this one, it was uber defining in terms of being a character trait. It really said a lot about who they were because we knew we wanted that to be such a big part of the show.
And it leveled the playing field, the eventual murder that they get wrapped up in. It didn't matter who had the money and who didn't. They all were now in it together.
Mm-hmm.
I also kind of touching upon what you were mentioning before, where you have Anna Sophia's character Alice, and she doesn't love Birdie when she first shows up. And so you have a little bit of tension between the two of them. But then you also have that dynamic where Catherine kind of seems like she's going to be opposing with Birdie as well. But immediately it's I see something in you and they connect. And so how did you decide where you wanted to allow a little bit of difference in distance between characters at the beginning, and where you actually almost wanted to circumvent the expectation of what it might be?
That's a good question. I mean, I think a lot of that comes from the actors too.
Yeah.
You're on set with them when you're shooting the pilot, and you can sort of see who has immediate chemistry with each other. And I think right away we were even when Asia, Naomi Kang, and Melissa Fumero were sort of sparring in the pilot, we were it'd be fun to have them become friends, unlikely friends, So a lot of that comes from their own chemistry.
Yeah, and we wanted them to kind of, we wanted each of the characters to have someone they could kind of learn their own lesson from, and it seemed like Catherine was the perfect person for Melissa Fumero's character Birdie, to kind of learn from, because she's done everything the right way and she's earned every penny, and she's now in high society because she deserves to be there, whereas Melissa Fumero's character just sort of ended up there based on marrying up and marrying wealthy, and so she had something to kind of learn from Catherine in a way that, Alice or Brett really couldn't teach her.
And then we didn't have time for many combinations we wanted to play with. We always did want to play with an Alice, Birdie, conflict to friendship sort of storyline. And we just didn't have time season one, but
and
hopefully
a Brett Birdie.
we will.
We wanted a Brett Birdie too.
Yeah. So many juicy combos that we just didn't have time
Season
for.
2.
Yeah.
Season 2.
And with Asia's character as well, on top of what you were describing, there's also, she's someone who really strives for perfectionism, and you can tell that she's always put a lot of pressure on herself and felt a lot externally. And there's kind of this discovery that she goes on of it doesn't actually pay off at the end of the day. And also it is okay to have these flaws. And so how did you set about deciding what you wanted that journey to look like? Because there's obviously the affair at the beginning of the series, but then there's all these other little teaching points for that throughout the show.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think a lot of that came from, we're both parents, and I think Catherine's big wake-up call in the series is early on in episode 4 when she realizes this perfectionism is hurting her daughter, is like literally fucking up her daughter. And I think that's sort of, I don't know, it's like the biggest thing for a parent. You know, you can have all of these self-destructive behaviors and not really care, but then when you realize you're modeling all of them for your young, impressionable children, you're like, oh my God, I can't anymore. So
well,
I think,
and also the idea of perfectionism is, you know, it's impossible to achieve. And so we really wanted right out of the gate with the pilot, her having this affair, like by definition, you know, she has failed somewhat in her marriage and her life. And so, you know, we really wanted to kind of showcase how, you know, she kind of, you know, gets in over, you know, her skis or whatever, you know, in her own personal life and then feels stupid about it because she has, you know, everyone else in town is also sleeping with this guy.
Yeah.
You know?
And with what you were describing about Melissa Fumera's character with Birdie in terms of parenting, you know, it's interesting because she is a parent, but she hasn't had the opportunity to have a relationship with her son. And we start to see it develop in these really lovely ways to what it builds towards at the end of the season. How did you set about finding what you wanted that pathway to be and a way that it could really teach her a lot about herself and reflecting on not repeating a lot of those self-destructive cycles?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we wanted it to be messy first and foremost, and that sort of applies to Catherine and all of the characters. We never wanted their sort of emotional journeys to be too clean or too perfect. And I think with Birdie's character, what's fun is she is trying to do the right thing and sort of reconnect with this son she gave up for adoption, but she's kind of doing it in a really selfish, messy, destructive, like maybe not the best for him kind of way, which he ends up calling her on later on.
Sleeping with his stepdad.
Well,
probably
there's that
isn't the
too.
best
Yeah.
approach.
Or inserting him, or inserting herself into his life and lying about who she is. I mean, she really takes sort of a for lack of a better word, messy way about reconnecting with him. But ultimately she does reconnect with him. So I think what was important for us was to not make it too clean, was to make it a little dirty the way she does it.
And it went a little bit beyond Ford. You know, we really wanted to be a journey about her learning to grow up. And it's, you know, she even has, you know, a comment where she says, you know, I'm basically doing everything I did in high school all over again. And it's like we wanted her to get to a place where she actually realized that.
And with Anna Sophia Robb's character, with Alice, it feels like there's a little bit of an arc for her in terms of defining herself as opposed to allowing other people to define her, because there's a lot of voices surrounding her trying to tell her who she should be and what she should want in her life. How did you really want her to come into her own by the end of the season in a different way?
I like that, putting it that way. We never quite put it that way to each other. That's so smart.
You know the show a little better than we do.
You might know the show better than we do. I mean, you're right. It's like she has these two very powerful men in her life. She has Brett. They're really powerful influences on her, and her husband, Doug, and they both think they sort of know what she should be doing and where the direction of her life should be going. And I think what's important for Alice this season is she sort of takes back the power and is like, nobody gets to decide. And it all sort of culminates on this night of the gala where she realizes Brett applied for this job for her. And Doug's been holding her back from it. And she's sort of like, fuck y'all, I'm going to do what I want. And in a season 2, that's something we really want to explore is like, what is she going to do with that job offer now that they've covered up an accidental murder? It gets very complicated.
Well, and it's also, we were making a comment on the Midwest too. You know, there's people who, you know, they want to grow and kind of leave the nest and go do the thing that they think is what they've always wanted to do. And we kind of wanted to challenge the idea of, is Alice just a dreamer, or is she someone who's actually going to go chase this, you know, this job and this, you know, the possibility of becoming a writer?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people are hit with that in their 20s where they're like, oh, I have all these big ideas, but I'm not sure that I'm capable of pulling them off. So they make a million excuses to not do them. And so we really wanted to see by the end of the season, if she is actually given this opportunity, what is she going to do with it? And then other things start to complicate that. i.e. the murder.
Yeah.
Murder complicates everything.
Yes, it sadly does.
There's also the triangle with Alice, and kind of the underlying feelings between her and Brett. And I thought you kind of arced it out and kind of played it really interestingly in that when she says a little bit of how she feels, you don't know if it's genuine. And, the person that she's having the conversation with doesn't realize that he's in the room hiding underneath the counter because it's
Right.
after the murder. How did you set about figuring out what you wanted their feelings to be and how you wanted it to exhibit?
We actually argued a lot about that.
we
And
did.
I think we went
We
back.
argue a lot.
We do argue a lot, but maybe it helps us get to a better place. I think how we've always talked about Alice and Brett is that they're complete soulmates. They're sort of meant for each other. The timing is terrible. And will it ever be the right timing? We don't know, but it's definitely not the right timing now.
But Brett's also challenged with, is Alice the person that, he feels he should be with? Or was she the first person or the closest person to him when Melissa broke his heart? And so, that's something he wrestles with when Melissa kind of comes back into his life and tells him, how she really feels about him. And so that's where we kind of wanted to get to also, which is he has a decision to make too, which is who is it that I really want to be with and why do I want to be with either of them?
Mm-hmm. And I think what's fun about the scene you're referencing where Brett's hiding and she says this thing and you don't know if she's saying it to get her mother-in-law off her back or if she's saying it because she means it, is we sort of answer that in the finale when she makes that call to him and she says basically like, I do think there could be something more, but what are we even going to do with that,
And with all of these characters and all of these narratives, you obviously have the overarching metaphors of gardening, which is so apt for the story that you're telling and kind of fits in so nicely. How did you set about finding all the different metaphors that you wanted to weave into the narrative and kind of making sure that they were all correct and factual as well at the same time?
A lot of Googling
Google.
about
I was
flowers.
gonna say Google. Yeah, mostly Google.
Sadly.
Does this sort of fit? I'm not
We're like,
sure.
could this be? We're kind
this
of
seems
trying
like
to
a theme. This
Yeah.
seems like a theme.
I mean,
Yeah.
the thing about the gardening metaphor, it's almost hard not to use it.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I can't, we
Growth
joke
and
about
death
it all the
and-
time. We're
and
like, are we going to
gardens-
plant that seed? Like
Yeah.
you can't not go there.
Gardens, grow through sex, basically.
Right,
So it's
right.
I mean, it just sort of lent itself naturally and organically to the show itself because like a garden, it's a bunch of different flowers that are all jammed together. So was our group, they were all from different walks of life and they all had to then kind of commingle and grow together.
Yeah.
And we always like the metaphor for actual Grosse Pointe too, that it's this beautiful place and it's rich and it's aspirational, but underneath there's some really like fucked
Damaged,
up situations,
fucked up
people and situations. And
Everyone's got skeletons.
it's dirty. Yeah.
It also sounds like the writer's room was probably rife with plant puns the whole time.
Oh
Yeah.
yes. We make fun of ourselves a lot.
I also know that you've both kind of talked about in writing together and this partnership that the two of you have, that you feel like you really kept each other on track in terms of the tone of the show.
Yeah.
And it's a tricky line to walk for a show like this because you want to acknowledge the seriousness of some of the things that you're touching upon and to allow these characters to have really real emotions, but you also want to have the humor and the comedy and to make sure that you're never going too completely far in either direction. Mm-hmm. So how did you kind of hold each other accountable throughout the process?
I mean, I think a lot of that, started with Good Girls, the show that Jenna created and I helped her run. We always would say it's a tightrope. We're like, if you lean too far one direction in towards drama, it's a different show. And if you lean too far towards the comedy, then it's also a different show. So we're always trying to balance it. And it was really, really tricky. But I think that the way we write together is we want to have a story that has a lot of heart and a lot of emotion, but we don't want it to be too terribly earnest or treacly. And so we always use comedy to kind of undercut that.
Yeah.
And I think we have to give props to the actors because I think their instincts are always to, even when it's like a jokier line, their instincts are always to play it super real and straight and grounded and trusting themselves that it'll be funny if they do it that way and not leaning into the joke. So I think they helped us a lot to achieve that tone.
Yeah, and a lot of our actors have background in comedy and in drama, so it really we were very lucky. They can kind of do it all.
Yeah.
I also love in the structure of this series that you would expect to find out in the final episode who it was that died, but you did that reveal in episode 11, which really gave a lot of interesting areas to build upon in those last couple of episodes. Did you know from the very beginning that you wanted to give that to the audience just that little bit earlier?
We did.
We designed it like a thriller. We kept saying we're like in in a horror movie.
Yeah.
By the end of Act 2, you think you have the killer, and then Act 3, it's like up the calls coming from inside the house, and so. We wanted to do the same thing. We wanted everyone to think they had all the answers. And then by the finale, we're going to then twist it on them.
And I think too, just nowadays, people are so impatient. I mean, Desperate Housewives was my first show here, and we did not reveal who the mystery in season 1 was. This woman killed herself. You don't know why. We didn't reveal it till like episode 24, and I cannot imagine that working now.
People are too impatient.
They're too
especially
impatient.
With streaming and
they're like, I want to know in episode 2 who's the body.
Yeah, they're smart. Yeah, they're almost smarter watchers.
Yeah,
they know what to look for. They look for the tricks. We would always go on Reddit and Twitter and stuff, and you would see all the theories developing. And so they really wanted to kind of get answers as quickly as possible.
They did.
It's also interesting to look back at some of the scenes in the later storyline, because you obviously have, before the murder and the night of, and the aftermath. And it feels like you were very specific about what moments you showed, and it's almost not the immediate aftermath because it would give it away too much, or the emotions of Alice might have given it away too much. How did that really set the scene for which specific moments of that night and afterwards that you felt like you could really play with?
Yeah, I mean,
we had a huge timeline in the writers' room that we were constantly adjusting and moving things around. And the hard part being on a network, being a network show is, we're shooting as we're writing. And so we started the season with only 3 scripts, and we were only about 2.5 weeks ahead of production. So we had to get everything kind of right once it was shot, because the cement then dries. And so we really were diligent about making sure that all the breadcrumbs added up to the right thing in the end. And we really wanted to make in the rearview mirror, we want it all to add up perfectly. And I don't know if it's perfect, but I think we did. But we were very strict about it, though. We wanted it to be perfect.
Yeah, but I think you're right. We couldn't show the immediate aftermath, because obviously you saw the immediate aftermath in episode 12. Alice is like the most, they're all upset, but like Alice is wrecked. So that would have given it away. So I think we picked later moments.
Yeah, and the cast didn't know who Quiche was until almost episode 7 or 8.
Close to when 11 was written. Yeah.
And so it was tough for them because they didn't know how to act, because they didn't know if Quiche was going to be someone who they
Very
were
close
related
to
to
them.
or not related to. And so we always had to kind of say, just trust us, we're aware of it, and we won't, betray the character or make it look like the character's insensitive in any way. And so
I also love what you were describing about the breadcrumbs, because I feel like there's even a point where Keith said something along the lines of like, "Oh, I'll be dead by then."
Yeah.
Yes, good catch.
We intentionally put that in. Yeah.
Yes.
But when you watch it the first time, you don't pick up on that.
Right.
But then it feels so different the second time. So how did you find that line of how far can we go in kind of laying out these details in front of you?
So much debate. Our biggest debate was when Keith in episode 9 comes into the garden center and he's kind of like trying to figure out what they're doing, and it looks like they're hatcheting a body. Our intention is we are showing that to tell the audience he's alive in the future. So in psychologically you go, oh, it can't be him. But we had a lot of debate about, is the smart audience going to go, but he's there on the night and we're not seeing his shoes.
How could someone else possibly be there?
How could someone else possibly be there?
We actually took it out of the script, and then we put it back in, then we took it out. And then actually, after we shot it, we took it out in editing. And we're like, we can still have the ending without it. And then ultimately,
we convinced ourselves,
yeah.
No, if it does convince people it's not him, it'll make the twist more satisfying. But yeah, a lot of debate. All of those breadcrumbs, you're like, is that giving it away?
Well, the big one that we had nothing to do with is we just coincidentally called the body Quiche. And early on, and everyone's like, oh, we should have known. Quiche sounds like Keith. And
my dad was like, it's the same name. It's how can people
So
not
he
know?
was on it from the beginning.
He was,
but we did not
didn't
think of that
Yeah,
at all.
that wasn't a breadcrumb.
When we write, we don't really write names. You know, people, when they speak to each other, they don't say the names. And so we hadn't written Keith in a long time.
It hadn't occurred to us.
Yeah. And so when people started saying that, we're like, oh.
Wait, it does sound like
yeah,
Keith.
boy, that would have made us really smart.
Yeah.
And you've also mentioned previously that it made it more interesting to have it be someone who didn't deserve it, because, you know, the beginning few episodes, watching it for the first time, you're almost thinking like, oh, well, it's going to be that person, because it felt like it was going to be something intentional, but it's so accidental and so unintentional. And that's also part of, you know, what causes Alice to feel the way that she does afterwards when she has to look at her mother-in-law's face. And was that something you knew right from the very beginning when you were deciding who it was?
We didn't want to have to let them off the hook. You know, by the time it happened, we want it to be so sort of emotionally traumatic that it's going to stick with them forever. If it was someone who really deserved it, per se, like Gary or one of the other characters, it kind of... It absolves them absolves their conscience, because it's like, yeah, that guy was kind of a dick and he kind of had it coming. And so we thought that it was going to be more powerful in subsequent seasons to have it be someone that they were close to, who actually was a sweet soul and, you know, really didn't see it coming.
And we also knew it was always going to be a sort of tragic accident that they then have to cover up for, you know, multiple reasons. But so we always knew that. And I think once we realized it needed to be that, we like the idea that it's not some uber villain you want dead. It's all this domino effect of tragic little happenstances that lead to that moment.
Yeah.
And it causes all of them to unravel in completely different ways, but then it also creates this closeness because they have to be able to rely on each other and they have to trust each other. And so how did you feel like individually it kind of unraveled them, but as a group it created a little bit more of a connect?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately we wanted the entire season to be they're the architects of their own demise, and that, you know, had Alice not gone on this simple journey of finding out who killed her dog, none of this would have happened, and it all branched out. And, you know, the sort of the sadness to it is that they were all so close to getting what they wanted out of life. And because of this bad decision, it was all kind of stripped from them. You know, Brett would have had custody of his kids or not been in the custody battle, and Birdie with her son and growing up, and Alice with her dream of going to New York. It's now all been taken away because of, you know, this tragic accident.
It also feels like in the way that the death plays out and what happens afterwards, that you kind of had to preempt the circumstances over why didn't they just call 911? And it ultimately comes down to that text message that Alice sent being like, I'm going to take away what you love the most. And obviously we know it's a quilt, but it reads very differently if suddenly your husband is dead and he's definitely been murdered, possibly. Was that also something that you thought about very specifically from the beginning?
Yeah. That text message that kind of blew open the end for us, because we were like, why wouldn't you just call the cops? It is an accident. And so we, for months, were trying to make that, you know, work. And then we came up with the text message and we were like, oh, that will be very difficult to explain. And at best, we're all still going to face some type of, you know,
manslaughter.
Punishment. Yeah.
I mean, I think too, what helps the text message is that by this point in the season, Alice's relationship with Patty, her mother-in-law, is so disintegrated. You know, Patty's blaming her for this fight that happened at the gala. They've gone back and forth in terms of, you know, Alice having a baby. Alice has tortured her with the dog. Like, it really has. She thinks that Patty killed her dog. Like, Patty wouldn't be, even if they called the cops in our minds, Patty wouldn't be a loving, supportive sort of mother-in-law to Alice.
It reads more like motive than anything
really
else by
does.
that part in the season.
Yeah, so we were trying to use the whole season and the dynamic between Alice and Patty to sort of, you know, set that up too.
And even going back to what you were describing about each of these characters before, and we really see them learn something about themselves and go on a little bit of an internal journey. And yet you still leave them in a place that's messy enough for the future, which is also reflective of the fact that, as you said, perfectionism isn't a real thing. It's not possible. How did you find how far along their journey with themselves you wanted to take them for the end of a first season?
I mean, we wanted all of them to kind of get within grasp, you know, get within like an inch of the thing that they've always wanted and then kind of take it away from them. That was, where they have their own growth and then realize, gosh, if we hadn't done this.
To make the murder impactful. Yeah.
It had to be we wanted to make it a tragedy. And that had they just not made a couple bad decisions along the way, they would all have much better lives than what they started with.
Well, I really, really enjoyed the season, so I appreciate you talking about it and getting to
you.
learn so much more. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much
This is
for
so
having us.
fun.
Yeah.